Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. What a lovely story we're listening to. Two boys trying to steal two rabbits from their next door neighbour's rabbit hutch, which belonged to their best friend Boris van Rensburg. But their trip back into the woods was not very exciting, because they had an encounter with a Bigfoot, and were terrified out of their skulls, as you can imagine. So let's continue with part 3 of our story tonight. But before we do, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with part 3 of our story tonight. The following morning, Simon checked on the rabbits and was heartily relieved to find them safe and well in the cat box outside the window. He quickly put them in the guinea pig enclosure behind the yard shed, where he was sure they would not be discovered. It was as the Miller boys were enjoying breakfast the following morning, their mother answered the landline, and came to the table looking somewhat troubled. "That was Nina van Rensburg, would you believe, on the telephone. She says that Boris is in quite the state this morning. Apparently 2 of his rabbits went missing last night, would you believe? She doesn't understand how they got out of the hutch. The combination lock was secured, and no one broke through the chicken wire. But Boris insists they went missing. Apparently Mr. van Rensburg also woke up during the night, claiming he was disturbed by some very bizarre owl calls he heard. Boris apparently is desperately upset about his missing 2 rabbits. He wanted to know if you boys know anything about their disappearance. He was saying you might have played a trick on him to get him back for putting a fake snake in your hutch a while back, as a joke. And apparently it gave you both quite the scare. I didn't know anything about that, I must admit. I told Mrs. van Rensburg that you would never pull a stunt like that, would you?" she said, looking at her 2 sons, with an earnest expression on her face. James and Simon's faces paled, and then Simon said rather too quickly, "Why would we know anything about Boris's rabbits disappearing? Mum, he's got over 20 rabbits. He lets them frolic around the lawn sometimes. Maybe the rabbits went walkabout, and he didn't notice that they had gone, and put 18 rabbits back into the hutch instead of, 20. There are wild rabbits running wild in the woodgrove. Maybe the tame rabbits have integrated with them. It happens, you know." "That's exactly what Mrs. van Rensburg believes. She says it was a dreadful oversight on Boris's part. But he insists he always counts the rabbits before he places them back in his hutch. But you're right. If you have so many rabbits in a hutch like Boris so obviously does, I imagine it's hard to keep track of all of them. Mrs. van Rensburg wants to replace the rabbits Boris lost, but he's insistent that he wants the rabbits back that have gone missing. But that's not going to happen if they've scampered off into the woodgrove to join the wild rabbits. I imagine they won't want to return to the trappings of domestic bliss. Not if they can roam freely and breed among themselves. And we all know how rabbits love to breed." It was after breakfast that James took Simon to one side and said, "What have you done? Boris is having a hissy fit. I think he knows we've taken his 2 rabbits. That's why he's making a song and a dance about it. What if he comes around here and finds the 2 rabbits we took, hidden in the guinea pig hutch? Maybe we should come clean about it and tell him it was just a joke and give him back his bunny rabbits. I had no idea he'd overreact like this. I mean, his mother's offered to replace the 2 missing rabbits, but he's having nothing of it. He knows we have his 2 bunnies, and that's why he wants them back, Simon. Come clean. Are you crazy, James? I'm not going to admit to taking his 2 bunny rabbits, and neither are you. Believe me, he'll calm down soon enough, especially when he realizes we have nothing to do with their disappearance. We can play the innocent with him, act like we haven't got a clue what he's talking about. I've paid you the money that I promised you, James, so I expect you to keep to your end of the bargain. I promise you it'll blow over soon enough. Boris will calm down about his rabbits when some other fancy gadget he can't live without grabs his attention. Well, I hope you're right, Simon. I don't feel good about any of this. I'm sure Boris is on to us. I mean, he's not stupid, is he?" As the 2 boys had predicted, Boris arrived at their front door a few hours later, very much out of breath. His whole face was red with indignation, and the jowls of his chin wobbled as he spoke. "You didn't take my 2 rabbits, did you, Simon?" he asked. "They went missing last night. I'm sure you've heard all about it from my mother." "We heard about it," said Simon nonchalantly. "Of course we wouldn't take your rabbits, Boris. So you're not playing a prank on me, are you? I told you I'm sorry that I scared you with the plastic snake. But stealing 2 of my rabbits is going too far. It's not even funny. But of course we didn't steal your rabbits, Boris. I'm sorry to hear your rabbits went missing. They're very tame. Maybe you'll find them," said Simon. "So you didn't take them?" asked Boris earnestly. "Of course we didn't take them," said Simon. "Maybe they strayed off when you let them out of the hatch. Maybe they're running around with the wild rabbits." "But I'm sure I counted them," said Boris in exasperation. "Mind if I look at your hutch, just to make sure you're not pranking me?" "But of course you can check out our hutch," said Simon, leading Boris to the rabbit hutch, and looking so very innocent that Boris was beginning to doubt himself, and feel a tad foolish for suggesting the Miller kids had anything to do with his 2 rabbits' mysterious disappearance. "I'm so sorry," he said. "I shouldn't have doubted the both of you. Your mother told my mum you'd never steal my rabbits. But I did know you wanted more rabbits, so I guess I thought you'd taken 2 of mine. I mean, your mum does refuse to buy you any more rabbits, and I knew you were jealous with me having so many. But I should have known you wouldn't do something like this." "But of course we wouldn't," said Simon. At this point, Simon's mother, Janice Miller, came over to Boris with a bright, sunny smile on her face. "I'm very sorry, Boris, to hear that 2 of your rabbits are missing. I want to assure you that neither Simon or James would ever take your rabbits. I've raised them better than that. If they pulled a stunt like that, they'd have me to answer to, and believe me, that would not be pretty." "I'm sorry, Mrs. Miller, for doubting Simon and James. You're right, they'd never do something like this to me. It was just my dad, you see. He suffers from insomnia. He struggles to sleep at night. Mum says it's 'cause he's too big and needs to lose lots of weight. Anyway, last night my dad heard this weird owl hooting. My mother did too. My father was convinced someone was wandering around our yard, but nothing was there. I just figured out that maybe Simon knows the combination number of the lock of my hutch, and I just thought he might have been responsible for my rabbit's abduction. But I know I'm wrong, and I'm sorry about it."
"Of course you're wrong, Boris, but it's perfectly understandable that you reached that conclusion. But you don't need to apologize to me. I quite understand how distressing it is for you to lose 2 of your beloved rabbits. But you do have a lot of rabbits, Boris, so maybe you didn't count them properly when you put them back in the hutch after allowing them to play in the yard. I'm sure there's a perfectly innocent explanation as to why they went walkabout. You never know. You might find them if you search the wood grove thoroughly. They're not like wild rabbits that would scurry away, are they? They're tame and are used to being cuddled by human beings. And Simon and James may be many things, Boris, but they're not thieves, and they are inclined to play pranks on people that aren't funny. But this is not one of them."
"I feel very relieved to hear you say that, Mrs. Miller. I think I'll ask my mother to go into the woods to search for my missing rabbits, 'cause I'm afraid I get a bit out of breath running up and down." Simon had decided to keep the new rabbits in the old guinea pig hutch behind the yard shed for the time being, for they appeared to be very happy there. He'd move them when the coast was clear. He was sure in time things would soon settle down, and no one would be any the wiser about what he and James had done. His mother would be unlikely to notice a couple of new rabbits, for she never paid any attention to her children's rabbit hutch, so why should she start giving it attention now? Simon and James wanted to tell their mother about their paradoxical Bigfoot encounter in the woods, but if they told her of their bizarre experience, she would then want to know what they had been doing in the woodgrove at the dead of night in the very first place, which would likely lead her to horrifyingly conclude that maybe her 2 children were behind the mysterious abduction of Boris's missing rabbits. Apart from anything else, she would be convinced they were making up the story just to be dramatic and to gain some unwanted attention, as Janice Miller was cynical at the very best of times. She had a science degree behind her, even though she was a stay-at-home mother. But in Janice's very narrow view of the world, ghosts, cryptid creatures, and anything that could not be scientifically quantified, measured, or studied could not exist in our reality. So Simon and James knew very well that they'd never be able to let the cat out of the bag about what had happened to them that night, and their cryptic encounter with a male Bigfoot. Their father, although much more easygoing and relaxed, would also be unlikely to believe their story. He would think it was unlikely and made up. "That Bigfoot may have been watching us," Simon had told his brother. "But if he really wanted to hurt us, he could have done so, couldn't he? He may have been stalking us, but we would have been easy pickings for him. But when we saw him, he vanished from our sight. Maybe he had no ill will towards us after all. Still, I wouldn't want to run into him again. He scared the bejesus out of me." "I suppose you're right," said James. "But I want to tell you, Simon, that no matter how much money you pay me, I will not go into the woods at night with you again. Not like that. Because that thing was terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. And it doesn't matter how much money you pay me, I won't do it again." "I can't say I blame you, James. I share the same feelings. But don't worry, there will be no further rabbit abductions. I think 5 rabbits is quite enough for us. We don't need to have as many as Boris does." Mrs. van Rensburg. Nina van Rensburg would have done anything for Boris and her husband, whether she was willing to admit it or not. She was what was known by many doctors who deal with obese patients and their families as the classic enabler. The reason her husband Louis and son Boris were carrying so much extra weight was because she refused them absolutely nothing. She had grown significantly apprehensive of late about Louis's burgeoning waistline, especially after her most recent visit to see Dr. Lambrose, who specialized in obesity issues, to discuss her husband's ever-increasing health problems, which were getting worse and worse by the day. Louis van Rensburg suffered from high blood pressure and diabetes, as well as very poor circulation in his lower legs, which had caused for him some edema and a host of skin infections that were not pretty and didn't appear to be going away. Dr. Lambrose was a young man in his early 30s, but he didn't sugarcoat the truth and was very clear about Mr. van Rensburg's worsening condition.
"I understand, Mr. van Rensburg, that you were an excellent wrestler at one point in time. But I hope you're not eating the calories that you did back then, because you're a non-active man these days, and your body's demands for energy expenditure are dramatically reduced. So any excess that you consume will automatically be stored as fat. The excess weight that you are wearing is because you're eating too much, and it's doing you no favours, Mr. Rensburg, especially not to your health. Once you lose the weight, Mr. van Rensburg, your health will significantly improve, and the good news is you'll be able to go off your medications. You need to cut back drastically on the snacking and have 3 healthy meals a day, focusing on protein and vegetables. You need to eliminate sugars and fats from your diet. Do you understand?"
Louis van Rensburg looked utterly miserable at the doctor's revelation.
"But Doc, I don't like salad, nor do I like vegetables, with the exception of potatoes and corn. I like my burgers and my chips. I don't want to eat all this healthy stuff. It's boring. That is what all my patients tend to say, Mr. van Rensburg. Their palates have grown used to fatty, very sweet food that is full of preservatives. When you're used to eating food low in nutrient density like this, your body is going to be naturally hungry, as it is not being properly fed, because it's malnourished, even though it's overweight. The body will send misleading hunger signals. So that's why you continue to eat, because it's looking for those micronutrients that are lacking in your food. I want to assure you, Mr. van Rensburg, that after 21 days of eating cleaner, you won't want to go back to your old habits, even though that might be hard to believe. When you start shedding that weight, you will feel and look so much better. In the beginning, the changes might appear boring. But, Mr. van Rensburg, you have a lot of weight you need to lose. You are morbidly obese, and with that comes many health complications.
But Dr. Lambrose, interjected Mrs. van Rensburg, Lewis has a very slow metabolism. That's why he is the size he is. He can't help it. His mother was absolutely enormous. You should have seen the size of her. I think Lewis takes after her.
I think you will find that genetics plays a very little role in the obesity epidemic that I'm currently seeing. People are making poor choices. That is why they are fat. It's as simple as that. You don't want your husband, Mrs. van Rensburg, losing his life because of his weight, do you?
What are you implying, Dr. Lambrose? Are you saying that Lewis is dying? Oh, goodness gracious me, please don't say that. He's not dying, is he?
Of course I'm not dying, love. Don't overreact. Your husband will die, Mrs. van Rensburg, much earlier than he should, if he carries on the way he is at the moment. I don't know how to get through to you, Mrs. van Rensburg, but your husband Lewis, if he continues to stay at the current weight he is, will have a shortened lifespan, and I'm sure you don't want that for him. So, yes, if you want to put it like that, he is slowly dying, living the way he is at the moment.
Are you saying he could die? Asked Mrs. van Rensburg, her jaw dropping open in horror. Just because he eats too much? That's not right.
Of course he could die from any amount of diseases that obesity causes, from diabetes to high blood pressure, sleep apnea, infections, and the list goes on and on. But the good news is we can fix this. But you're going to have to be very strict with your husband, Mrs. van Rensburg. You cannot give in to your husband's every whim. My advice to you is to not keep any tempting foods in the pantry or refrigerator that might prove irresistible to your husband. I know your son Boris is also extremely overweight, Mrs. van Rensburg, so I'm relying on you to be the one in the family that nips this in the bud once and for all. You don't want to become an enabler, do you? Most people who are obese have someone in the household that is giving in to their every need, which serves to exacerbate the problem, as no one wants to take responsibility for it. But I'm hoping, Mrs. van Rensburg, I can trust in you to take care of this problem.
Well, of course I don't want to be an enabler, Dr. Lambrose, said Mrs. van Rensburg, her heart wilting at the very idea of saying no to her husband and son about anything. She loved spoiling the both of them very much, and giving them their heart's desires. But if what she was doing could ultimately kill the both of them, she would have to adopt a tough approach on their eating habits from now on. But it was going to be extremely hard, for she loved the both of them so very much. But Dr. Lambrose had confirmed her very worst fears. She was going to have to start saying no to her husband and son, and it was not going to be easy. It was after the visit to Dr. Lambrose that Nina van Rensburg had decided to toughen up significantly. So when Boris had come to her to tell his mother to please go looking for his 2 missing rabbits that might have joined the wild rabbits in the woods, as he wasn't fit enough to do it himself, Mrs. van Rensburg surprised herself by saying no to him. The word no, coming from Nina van Rensburg's lips, was so alien to Boris that his mouth simply dropped open, rather like a Venus flytrap, and his double chins jiggled in shock. Had he heard right? Had he? His mother had refused his request. That had never happened to him before.
But, Mum, you've got to go into the woods. I'm sure my 2 rabbits are there. If you see them hopping around, you can catch them for me. They're tame. They'll come to you. And then you can bring them back and put them in their hutch.
What part of the word no don't you understand, Boris?
Said Nina van Rensburg, surprising herself by being so tough on her son and putting up some resistance to his requests, something she'd never done before.
But, Mum, I get tired running around the woods.
How old are you, Boris?
Asked Mrs. van Rensburg, pressing her lips tightly together and suddenly looking extremely formidable, So much so that Boris did a double take. He had never expected his mother before to look like this, and it had made his knees wobble uneasily. She looked more fearsome than Janice Miller next door, which really was saying something.
I'm 10.5 years old, Mum. I'm nearly 11. You know that already. So why are you asking me such a stupid question?
You are 10 years old, Boris, and you're so fat and so desperately unfit that you can't do something as simple as go walking in the woods looking for your rabbits. It's not normal for a 10-year-old boy to be physically impaired like this. You're not handicapped, are you? But you're behaving as if you are. I blame myself for giving in to your every whim. From now on, there will be no more Boston cream pies, and definitely no more tapioca pudding. I'm going to insist you do some exercise to get yourself fit again. And you can start by going into the woods and looking for those rabbits yourself. I'm sorry, love, but I'm not going to help you. You need to do this yourself. If you don't find your 2 missing rabbits, I will not replace them for you. 18 rabbits is more than enough. You don't need 20 anyway.
Why are you being mean, Mum?
Because I love you, that's why. And I'm determined that you and your father are going to reinvent yourselves. From now on, I'm going to be very strict, as Janice Miller from next door is also strict with her children. So, like her, there'll be no sugar in this house, and you'll thank me one day for this. I can promise you of that.
I'll never thank you, Mum, because you're horrible, really horrible, and I hate you. I really hate you.
That's not a nice thing to say to your mother, said Mrs. van Rensburg. Now go on to the woodgrove and find those missing rabbits of yours. I'm not going to do it for you. I'm sorry, but I'm not.
Boris van Rensburg was far from amused. What had got into his mother? Why had she come down on him like a ton of bricks? Ever since his 2 rabbits had gone missing from his rabbit hutch, and his mother had taken his father for a medical with Dr. Lambrose, she had returned home looking so formidable. He had seen her open the cupboards and toss away all the nice things in their household into black bin liners, and she had dropped them off at a children's home, all that lovely food. Now she was turning into a monster, so much so that he and his father were not warming to her at all. What had got into his mother, he wondered. He was hoping it was a passing phrase, and that his mother would be back to herself soon enough, and serving him up gluttonous portions of tapioca pudding. In fact, Boris would go so far as to say that Janice Miller from next door was looking like a much nicer, more amenable mother than his own mother right now. He never thought he'd ever think that. Why was his mother being so mean? Last night they'd eaten meat and 2 veg for dinner, and his father had stormed off in a huff, complaining that the food had been so bland. His mother had confiscated the takeaway that Lewis had sneakily ordered, behind his wife's back. She had given it to Chloe, their yellow Labrador, which was so annoying. And Chloe had gobbled it all down. It looked as if their dog was eating better than they were right now, and it made him sick to his stomach. It absolutely wasn't fair. His mother kept saying she was being hard on them because she loved them so much and wanted them to live a long time. But if living a long life meant eating broccoli and dried chicken breasts, then it would be a joyless life for sure. If that wasn't bad enough, his mother was refusing to replace his 2 missing rabbits, and they were lightly bounding around the woodgrove with the wild rabbits, so he needed to find them. At first he had been so sure that Simon and James had been responsible for pinching his rabbits. He would not have put anything past Simon, as he knew how passionate Simon was about rabbits. It had given him great satisfaction to see how green at the gills Simon had become, after he'd shown them his superior rabbit enclosure and his 20 brand new rabbits that his mother had purchased for him. Simon had gone on and on about how unfair it was that Boris had 20 rabbits, and he and his brother James only had 3. So was it any wonder that Boris had doubted the Miller kids, and believed that they had crept out of their house in the middle of the night and surreptitiously kidnapped a couple of his rabbits? I mean, even his own father had been awoken to some strange hooting sounds during the night, and had felt certain that someone was wandering around their backyard. So he wondered if it had been Simon and James, but they had both insisted that they would never steal his 2 rabbits. Simon had been so genuine when he had said this that Boris had believed him at once, so he had concluded that he had clearly not counted his rabbits correctly when he had replaced them in their hutch after giving them a run around his backyard. Even though Boris was unfit, he was determined to find his 2 missing rabbits. He was very annoyed that his mother was not searching for them on his account, but she seemed to have turned on him like a rabid wild animal, and was suddenly depriving him of all the good things that life had to offer. At one time he considered himself pretty fortunate to have a mother he could twist around his little finger. He had been spoilt rotten as a result, but in the last day or so, his mother's attitude had shifted exponentially. She was no longer easy to manipulate. Indeed, this morning she'd made him make his own bed for the first time in ages, clean out his bathtub, and put his clothes away very neatly in the closet. And if that was not bad enough, after breakfast he'd been expected to put away the dirty dishes in the dishwasher, which had been an exhausting business for him. Boris was not in a good mood. He felt bitterly resentful towards his mother for being so unobliging. He heaved his substantial bulk down the woodland trail, looking around for his lost rabbits. He was wheezing and gasping for breath. That was how unfit he was, but he was so determined to find the rabbits he had lost. If he didn't do it, his 2 rabbits might be gone for good, especially if they got comfortable with the wild rabbits. Boris knew he was fat, and he didn't need people to tell him he was in bad shape. He was reminded of his ever-increasing waistline every single day of his life. He hated the way he was bullied at school by everyone, and how some of the boys made fun of him for his mere size. He always told anybody that would listen that he had a metabolism problem, but the truth was no one really knew how much Boris ate behind the scenes, and he would eat almost as much as his father. He wasn't involved in sports at his school, as his mother had told them that his son had a medical condition, which meant he didn't have to do sports, and that wasn't exactly true. She had now just told him she had contacted the local school to tell them that Boris was now able to return to sports, and would be fit enough to do so. Now Boris would be forced to run around the field, gasping for breath and sweating profusely, so the kids would tease him all the more, calling him all those cruel names like Blubberface, Pork Pie, Jelly Belly, Porker, and Waddling Boris. Why had his mother done this to him? He was bullied enough already, and if he returned to the sports field, everybody would laugh at him as he waddled around, trying desperately to kick a ball, with very little success. How could his mother betray him like this? He was sure that Mrs. Miller from next door was influencing his mother. She was always telling her that Boris was far too spoiled and that she needed to do something about his weight problem before it got out of control.
You know what they say, Nina,
he had overheard her telling his mother.
Obese children turn into obese adults. Do you realize giving in to all his temptations means that you're practicing child abuse? That's what it is.
Boris knew it was all nonsense, of course, but Janice Miller seemed to influence his mother very negatively these days, and he didn't like it one single bit, but there was not a jot he could do about it. It didn't help that Dr. Lambrose had laid into his mother, claiming that he and his father's lives would be dramatically shortened if they continued to eat so much. Boris now hated Dr. Lambrose almost as much as he hated Janice Miller, and now his mother was as bad as they were. It would seem for Boris, taking this leisurely walk in the woods, looking for his missing rabbits, was more than he'd bargained for. His legs were aching as he stumbled awkwardly down the woodland trails. Where were his rabbits, he wondered? It was a beguiling afternoon, with the sun prettily trickling through the trees and inviting its warmth to caress Boris's shoulders. But heaving his weighty girth around was making him work up quite a sweat, and the sweat was now pouring down his forehead and dribbling down his back, so that his T-shirt was sticking to him very uncomfortably. Any normal person would have appreciated the prettiness of the woodgrove that day, but Boris didn't notice any of it. He would so much prefer being indoors, reading a comic, watching Netflix, and tucking into a big bag of Cheetos. He felt incredibly annoyed with his mother for laying down so many stringent rules, when in the past she had let him have anything he wanted. All of a sudden, Boris was delighted to see a couple of grey rabbits running down the trail. He felt his heart lift. They were wild rabbits, of course, but maybe his 2 tame rabbits were hanging around them. On seeing him, the wild rabbits scurried away very quickly, but Boris picked up speed, his breath becoming raspy, and for a moment his head began to spin, and he felt as if he might pass out. He held on to a tree branch to stabilize himself and prevent his body from keeling over and collapsing from the strain of such vigorous excursion. He stood still briefly for a moment and took in some deep breaths. All of a sudden he heard what he could only describe as a couple of snorts. The sound reminded him of the noise Russell Ingram made in class when he laughed at something, but he knew this wasn't coming from Russell, as Russell was not in his midst. So then who was it? Was someone actually laughing at him, he wondered? His self-conscious radar was now standing up to attention, as Boris was well used to the boys at school making fun of him. But who was there, he wondered. "Is anybody there?" he called out, but the snorting sound had suddenly just stopped. And all he could hear were the sounds of the birds tweeting in the trees. Had he imagined the snorting, he wondered? Once again a couple of wild rabbits crossed his path, so he began running towards them, and the snorting started up again. Someone was definitely laughing at him. Boris was sure of it. This was not funny. "Who's there?" he called out, but the woodgrove did not betray its secrets, for the snorting stopped, and the chirruping sounds of the bird song continued. So there we are, that's the end of part 3. Part 4 is tomorrow night. I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.